Okay, guys, we're back. I just I'm going to zip through this religious stuff here, except that I just want to put this last paragraph of Foucault's is super important, because I think Foucault does something really smart, which is he notices the ways in which the study of literature parallels that of the study of the Bible. In particular, that the way we learned to understand literary texts the origins of let's sit around and interpret Shakespeare come from let's sit around and interpret the Bible, which means that the traditions that were created back in the old days for the Bible have followed us into the modern day. I don't know if I've told this story before. Mackenzie, did I tell everybody the story about the rock and the road in Italy?
I don't recall that.
So I just it's this is a thing I think about all the time. But right, ancient Italy, in ancient Rome, right? They had to get to Rome or whatever from the countryside. So they walked there, right? But then maybe there's a fucking big rock or something that they can't move, or a mountain or whatever the fuck it is, right? So the road bends, right? Actually, I'm sorry, the path. They just walk around the giant rock, right? And then you wait 100 years and they put down some stones, for carts or whatever, and then you got like a little pathway with some rocks on it. So a dirt path, maybe put some rocks on it, maybe it puts so it's first of all, let's start this. Number one, it's plants. People walk around the rock and they get to Rome. And then after a while, they're like, when enough people walk on it, it just gets tramped down into like a dirt path. And then after a while, they take the dirt path and they put like stones on it so you can run a wagon wheel over it. But then after a while, they like pave it smooth for like cars. And then they update it. They make nice shiny pavement for cars. But the funny thing about that is that you end up bending around that rock. Well, why? Well, because 500 years ago, they couldn't bend around that rock. So now the point is that the pathways that you take to go to modern day Rome were set there by hikers 1,000 years ago, more than 1,000 years, 2,000 years ago, or whatever, right? And that's why it's interesting, because the pathways that we take to understand literature were set there by Bible interpretation. So it's always worth paying attention to where these things come from. So he talks about in De Viris Illustribus, I don't know what that is. Saint Jerome maintains that hominy is not proof of the common authorship of several works, and many individuals could have the same name, or someone who could have perversely appropriated another author's name. So, like, here's a stupid question: if you're looking at books from thousands of years ago and you have two authors and they have the same name, does that mean it's the same guy? It's not at all clear. For example, Satan is mentioned many times in the Bible. The word Satan in Hebrew means opponent. Well, that's real confusing, because it becomes quickly unclear if this is supposed to be like the same guy or not. Mackenzie, are we good? I got some low battery
Yeah.
stuff, but okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, yeah, I should get a battery pack or something. All right, everybody hold on while I get a battery pack. Oh, good. I can do both. So it becomes unclear. Like, Satan is in the Bible, but the word Satan just means. Oh, I don't have my battery back. Hold on. The word Satan is in the Bible, but Satan just means opponent. So it's very unclear if, like, the guy from the book of Job who challenges God by saying Job won't worship you if you don't treat him nice. It's not at all clear that that's the same guy who is like the beast at the end of the book. Okay, so now I got battery power. Good. All right, so with that in mind, let's take a look. I'm just going to zip through this last paragraph here. Okay, blah, blah, blah. According to St. Jerome, yep, okay. What norms related to the function of the author will disclose the involvement of several authors, right? How do you know if people are working on this together? According to St. Jerome, there are 4 criteria. Text must be eliminated from the list of works attributed to a single author or those inferior than others. Thus, author is defined as a level of quality, right? Sometimes you go, well, this is too, Shakespeare couldn't have written this. It's crap. That's a very common argument. People will literally be like, this part of the play is bad. I don't think Shakespeare wrote it. You don't think Shakespeare can write something bad? That's crazy. Okay, so then let's talk about how, right, does the author explain the presence of certain, all right, there's a whole bunch of stuff here. Those written in style or containing words and phrases not ordinarily found in the other works. The author is seen as a stylistic uniformity. So there's a thing that'll happen in Shakespeare where you're just like, this doesn't sound like Shakespeare. And so people will go, therefore, Shakespeare didn't write it. But of course, you could write something that sounded not like you. Um, and Foucault goes on to kind of talk about, and I'm not going to go through all of this, but the point is he goes through all of these different things that the way authors were defined when they were looking at ancient holy works that still guide the way that we look at books in an English literature classroom today. Um, and even though we think, oh, we're not like those sort of silly, old-fashioned religious people, we 100% are. Um, okay, so the thing I kind of want to end thinking about a little bit, my kind of final thoughts section. I'm just looking through this. The kind of final thing I want to think about is a moment in Logan, which is one of my top 10 movies is Logan. It's for sure. It's my favorite superhero movie. Favorite superhero movies, by the way. Number 1, Logan. Number 2, Into the Spider-Verse. Number 3, Thor Ragnarok. There's a moment in Logan I think about all the time. It's one of the most fascinating moments I've ever seen in any movie. Logan is an X-Men movie, but stylistically, doesn't really look like an X-Men movie. It feels much more realistic. It's like a cowboy movie, and it's a more serious, realistic kind of thing than the X-Men movies are. Um, and the little girl in the X-Men in the movie, she has a comic book, an X-Men comic book, because apparently there are comic books made about these real life people. And Wolverine looks at the comic book and he says, "Oh, Charles, we've got us an X-Men fan here." And he kind of makes fun of it. He calls it ice cream for bedwetters. He says it's for kids. And he looks at the comic book and he says the most fascinating thing in the movie. I think it's the most interesting line in the whole movie. And one of the most interesting lines I've ever heard in any movie is he says, "Listen, maybe a third of it happened and not like this." He throws the comic books at her because he says this is nonsense for kids. I think he says a quarter. He says maybe a quarter of it happened and not like this. Meaning her comic books only capture about a third of his life, a quarter of his life, the adventures of the X-Men. Maybe a quarter of those adventures really happened, and they weren't like that anyway. And it's a simple line in the movie. He's just telling her comic books aren't an accurate depiction of his life. But the bigger issue is, it feels like, remember I told you always to talk about the author and audience in your paper? Well, if you expand out to think about author and audience, this really feels like the director of the movie saying, only a quarter of the X-Men movies really happened, and not really like that. More like this, more like my movie. My movie's official. Those other ones are ice cream for bedwetters. They're for kids. Because if you know your X-Men, there's a lot of garbage X-Men movies that I would love to reject as crap. Particularly X-Men Origin Wolverine, which is one of the worst of them. And so this is the director's way of rejecting those earlier things. But you see what happened is that, and first of all, you can see, by the way, remember Harold Bloom, authors are fighting with other authors. So the Logan movie is making a commentary, a response to the earlier movies and rejecting them. But in terms of Foucault, the thing that interests me about this is it's the movie saying, all those things you thought were official aren't official, but he doesn't tell you which ones are official and not. He just says that a bunch of it's crap and it didn't really happen like that. And what you're looking at is a chance for the fans. As a fan, you're going to get to decide. You have to decide for yourself which things really happened and which things didn't. This is called, in comic books, this is called retconning, which is short for retroactive continuity, which is what happens when you show up late and you say, oh, by the way, something's always been like this. It happens in the Bible. At the end of the Bible, in the very last book of the Bible, in Revelations, they say, oh, hey, by the way, do you remember that snake who tricked Eve? That was Satan. But that was not in the original book. That Genesis never says that snake is the author of all evil on earth and God's primary opponent. It's just a mean snake. But at the end of the Bible, in the book of Revelations, they say, oh, by the way, that snake is Satan, which is crazy because the book of Revelations was written 800 years after the book of Genesis. So 800 years later, somebody was like, oh, by the way, that snake was Satan the whole time. And now people are like, ooh, Satan tempts Eve in the garden. Did he? And also, are you a member of a religion that even accepts that last book? Because a bunch of religions do not accept the book of Revelations. Jewish people certainly do not accept the book of Revelations as official. But here comes this extra movie, this extra sequel that says, oh, by the way, that snake was Satan the whole time. So can anybody show up at any point and change what your story is? And what does that mean for authors? I've hit the time limit on this, but I'm going to hit stop here and we will have one more video on this, I think. Okay.